kind of a serious one today. I was trying to think of something funny to open this with, and I couldn't come up with anything funny. But we're talking today about couples that one or the other of the couple is staying in the marriage but has checked out of the marriage in their mind or with their emotions. How do we handle that situation where the temptation is for us to check out because we're not happy in our marriage? We don't want to be there anymore, but we know divorce is a bad thing. We know it's going to affect those around us. It's going to affect our children. It's going to affect our finances, but I don't really want to be here. And so I've kind of mentally or emotionally checked out of my marriage and am just in sort of a holding pattern until something happens.
Yep. Let's get into that.
Before we get into today's episode, just wanted to remind you that in the description of the video below, we put links to all of our social media accounts.
You can always reach us with questions or comments about this episode at marriagebydesignpodcast@gmail.com.
And finally, if you want to support us financially, there is a link to be able to do so at the end of each of the descriptions of our videos. Now, let's get back to the show. Hey everybody, my name is Nathan Warnock.
I'm Andrea Warnock, and you've joined us for Marriage Monday on the Marriage by Design podcast. This is a time where we get to talk to you about God's design for marriage, what the Bible has to say about that, and then how we live that out practically. So today we're talking about being in a marriage but checked out, and kind of how this came about is that I mean we've counseled a lot of couples that have gone through this sort of thing, and in some groups that I'm a part of, I hear of a lot of women in these groups who are in their marriage, and either they themselves are so checked out and they just financially don't have a way out, or are worried about what would that do to my future or my kids or whatever, or their husband is checked out and they don't really have a marriage. They're just living life the way,
right.
They're trying to get by. And they're frustrated that it's not what they signed up for. It's not what they vowed. And, that it's hurtful, and it just is.
Right. So if you're watching this and you're married, maybe this doesn't describe you. Before you check out of this video, there's a couple of groups of people that I would humbly ask you before you bail on this video to think about and maybe share with one of these couple of groups of people. And here's the two groups of people. The newly married. This is an important message for the newly married because I don't know if you know this or not, but newly married become oldly married. And
at some point,
oftentimes in the meantime, this becomes an issue. Might be for a brief amount of time, might be for a long period of time, but the temptation to fall into this, I like to call it walking dead, part of marriage is a temptation. So share this with newly married couples.
Yeah, in fact, the statistics we were reading was the kind of wedded bliss phase lasts for 1 year, and then you're sort of oldly married.
Right, which means we're anciently married at this point,
yes,
coming up on almost
right.
18 years. The other group of people that I would ask you to share this with is someone you might know who has fallen in. And look, the majority of our audience is Christian individuals, those that profess faith in Christ. And so many of us Christians know that divorce is wrong. It's something that God hates, as he says in the Bible very clearly. So what we do is we become unhappy in our marriage. And rather than pursuing divorce, we become the walking dead, where we're just living in this marriage, not treating our spouse very well in the hopes that our spouse commits one of those big 2 or 3 things in the Bible that will allow me to get a divorce without looking like the bad guy.
Or not even that, just I'm doing this marriage thing. I'm gritting it out because I'm not going to get a divorce because the Bible is against that. And I guess I'm just going to grit it out.
Sure, and that's the long-term Walking Dead. Those are the deep Walking Dead, which is certainly, you're right, is exactly a thing. But the several of the couples we've counseled kind of just fell into this category of they want to get a divorce, they just don't want it to look like it's quote unquote their fault. And so they just hang out in this Walking Dead phase until hopefully their spouse screws up and then they can get a divorce without looking like the bad guy.
Or they're hoping that their spouse changes.
Right. Yeah. Without them having to change, of course, because that's uncomfortable. So those are the couple of groups of people I would ask you to share this video with. So the way that we're going to dig into this, or this podcast if you're listening on audio, so the way that we're going to tackle this is Andrea's going to set the stage a little bit for kind of why this is a thing and what we're talking about here. And then we're going to take a look at, one, what does the Bible say about this? And two, what do we need to be doing as married couples to identify this, to protect against it, or to defeat it if we find ourselves in this place? So I'm going to back off, and Andrea is going to bring the heat.
Yeah, so in researching this, there was one article that I felt really was pretty captivating, interesting about this. And I don't remember who it was by.
Psychology Today.
Yes. I'm glad you remembered that. Thank you.
You bet.
Psychology Today. And it was this article about people who are unhappy in their marriages. And they said statistically, man, why am I having a problem with that word? Anyway,
I don't know.
Stats show that
nice.
6 in 10 couples are unhappy in their marriage.
Whoa.
Which is
think of that.
Crazy.
That's almost 60%.
But oddly, at a different point in the article, it said as many as 82%, 83% are unhappy in their marriages. Did you remember reading that? Anyway.
Yeah. It was 2 different studies. So she was quoting some different studies. And best case was 6 out of 10.
Right. Best case was 60%.
The other studies were much higher.
Right.
Yeah.
And in our experience, I would say 60% is, probably conservative.
Probably.
I think
probably even within the church, if we're being honest. I mean,
right.
Obviously, most of the couples we've counseled are quote unquote Christian couples.
Yeah. And another article I read, which I said that typically couples with children are actually even more so unhappy, but they're also less likely to get a divorce.
Yeah, that preaches, by the way.
Yeah, right. So, we've got 60% or more of people who are just unhappy in their marriages.
Yep.
And so what? Yeah,
right.
Some of them are getting divorced. Some of them are just sticking it out for variety of reasons.
Yep.
But is that really honoring to the marriage? We talked about a few weeks back, probably 5 weeks back, that marriage should be held in honor among all.
Right.
The Bible tells us that. And if we're not honoring our own marriage by continuing to seek the Lord and put the Lord first and work towards a God honoring marriage, which doesn't look like I'm just mailing it in, I'm gritting my teeth and just doing this marriage thing, then we're not honoring our own marriage in doing that and just accepting, this is a crappy marriage and I'm just going to deal with it,
But what if our spouse isn't keeping up their half of the deal?
Right. Doesn't that stink?
Right.
But are you? I think that's probably something that we're going to talk about more in the rest of later in the episode. But you are responsible for your own self. You can't change your spouse. And in fact, the best way to change your spouse is to love them well.
Right.
Love changes people. Is it 1 Peter 4:8 says love covers a multitude of sins. And we can see that time and time again in history and in our own experience and in couples that we've worked with, that choosing to love your spouse, whether you feel like he or she deserves it, covers a multitude of sins. Sure. It changes your spouse's heart. It changes your own heart. It changes the roots of bitterness that you have growing in your heart or that your spouse does. And it works on, your heart and your mind and your emotions just as much as it works on your spouses. So love covers a multitude of sin in a marriage too.
Right. And what I was probably poorly getting at too is where this Psychology Today article really gets it wrong, and where so many couples get it wrong, is it kept talking about the marital agreement. Right. So what I was getting at there is we have to stop thinking about that marriage is a contract between two people and come to an understanding that it is a covenant that we make before the Lord. And as a covenant before God, there is no half of the deal. Like we both agree to go all the way, regardless of whether our spouse does or doesn't do really anything that they've said they were going to do.
And that's so hard.
Sure, practically. It is. Sure, it is.
But that's marriage. That's what we don't maybe understand that we're getting into, but we really are.
Right.
When we make a covenant for marriage.
That's right.
Is your marriage is not meant to complete you. It's meant to be self-sacrificing, not self-serving. I shouldn't be looking for, how can Nathan complete me, or how can he make me happy, or any of that sort of thing. If you have any of those thoughts, they're wrong. They're just downright wrong. And not to say that you shouldn't want to be happy in your marriage. You should. But your primary focus should be, how can I love my spouse well? How can I serve them? How can I meet them where they're at? How can I slay my selfish desires and pursue theirs, their desires, Right. And if you're both doing that, you're kind of looking to outserve one another, and that's a wonderful marriage.
Right.
So this article talked about, marriage and how people are unhappy and for a variety of reasons. And at the end of the article, it basically said, well, really for people to be happy, we need to just redefine marriage. So maybe that looks, again, this is what the article was saying. Maybe that looks like, you're married, but you live in two separate houses.
Right.
Or you're married and somebody has a girlfriend or a boyfriend on the side.
Because you're just not cut out for monogamy.
Right. You're not monogamous. Or I don't remember what the other things were.
Which, of course, is, you can call, words are words, right? We can call things whatever we want to call them. This microphone that I'm speaking into, if I want to call it a Cadillac and tell everyone I own a Cadillac, that's perfectly fine. It's not a Cadillac.
It's not reality.
A microphone.
Right.
So rather than dealing in the realm of marriage, which is already a previously defined institution, we're just changing semantics to make it be whatever we want. And of course, the point of this article, and not surprisingly, coming from Psychology Today, their answer to this is pursue happiness at all costs.
Yep. And that's the answer that society tells us too.
Right.
We should always be looking for our happiness. Who cares what the consequences are to anybody else?
That's right. And the entirety of that article then doesn't become, like, in that article, your spouse is a complete and total side note to your happiness. Doesn't matter what they want. Doesn't matter who they are. All that matters is that if you're not happy in marriage, maybe it's time to talk to your spouse about redefining your marriage. And don't be ashamed about that, because at the end of the day, you need to do you. Wrong. Go and I would challenge anyone listening to this, get a concordance like this one we have back up here, Strong's, and look up every verse that talks about marriage and find me a single one where the person that's being talked to in the marriage is being told, man, make sure you're getting taken care of. Mm-hmm. There isn't a single one of them, not one.
Yep.
Women are called to submit. That sucks. Men are called to sacrifice their entire lives. That sucks. Men are told your wife's body is yours. That sucks. Women are told your husband's body is yours. That sucks. There is no, and I'm saying sucks tongue in cheek because of course the point is, and we talk about this all the time on this channel, when you really understand and submit to the lordship of Christ, which means submitting to his plan for marriage, none of this stuff sucks.
Right. Because what is your focus? Your focus is the Lord,
Right.
and pursuing the heart of the Lord. And if that's our life, then we can get to the place that Paul got to, where he was saying, if I die, great, I'll be with the Lord. If I live, great, I get to serve the Lord. We can say, whatever happens in this life, if I'm just pursuing the Lord, great, because then my life is a reflection of the Lord.
Right. The craziness about Christ and the work he did and what the Bible teaches us is the dichotomy of being human. Do you want to be strong? Become weak. Do you want to lift yourself up? Then humble yourself before God. Do you want to be happy in your marriage? Then care only about your spouse's happiness in their marriage. That's the craziness of it. And we listen to these things and we go, yeah, that's just so spiritual and godly. Be humble, be meek, be reliant on the Lord. But I mean, not like, did you see the way my wife talked to me? Right? Like we want to listen to those dichotomies in every area of our lives except our marriage.
Yeah. And the crazy reality is the more we humble ourselves and don't put our happiness first and choose the things of the Lord and choose to put our spouse first, the more fulfilled we are in our lives and in our marriage. I mean, so many people I know, and not that I have like statistics or that I would say this is everybody, but I'm sure there's people who've sought their happiness without care for the consequences and they're happy. But so many people that we know have done things to pursue happiness that are self-seeking, and they would at the end of the road say, I'm so unhappy.
Because it's fleeting. Happiness is fleeting. It's fickle.
And right. And the goal is always changing, and the sacrifices for other people are many and much. And
happiness is oftentimes boils down to us, quote unquote, following our heart. And the Bible's very clear that you're in a really dangerous position when you do that, because as the Bible teaches us, the heart is infinitely wicked, deceitfully wicked. Who can know it? And of course, the implication, as we pointed out on this channel, is not you. So when you say like, I just want to follow my heart, you might be running off a cliff because your heart is against you, and you don't know it until you're in free fall off the cliff, and then you go, crap, that wasn't what I wanted at all.
Yeah. Yep.
So what?
Right. So what do we do?
Right.
Let's say we're unhappy in our marriage. Well, I guess you can join 5 other couples. The other 60%, you can be the 6th couple, and you can just grit it out. But I would submit that that's not the Lord's plan for your life.
It's not the plan He has for you,
and it's not honoring to what godly marriage is.
Right.
And there's no. You don't have to be unhappy, unfulfilled in your marriage by just, because I'm just not getting a divorce, but I'm choosing to just do this thing.
That's right.
That's not God's plan for your marriage.
Right.
So if you're in a marriage where you're unhappy or feel like you're just going through the motions, there's no depth, there's no intimacy, it's just blah. The first thing you've got to do is pursue the Lord in your own life, and don't stop focusing on your spouse as far as the things that they're doing wrong or how they're not making you happy or how they're not pursuing you. Instead choose to focus on the Lord first, and then focus on, okay, what can I do to love and respect my spouse well, especially if you feel like they don't deserve it.
Yeah. Let me just, because I want you to expand on that second one. But the first one, I want to be super practical here. When we talk about focusing on the Lord, here's what I would ask you to do. And they're online for free. Find a biblical concordance and start with looking up every verse that talks about marriage. If you're going like, hey, I feel like my life's pretty great, except for this whole marriage thing, start by doing a deep dive into what the Bible says about marriage, because that alone will probably change your whole worldview on what marriage is and help get you aligned with what the Lord's design for marriage is. And then you can then you can know what his plan is. And I mean, by all means, shameless plug, subscribe to our podcast and all. That's all great. We do a lot of studying what God's design for marriage is, but we're not God. So get in your Bible and see what actually God says about his design for marriage and make that your quest. Try and have a master's class in what does it mean to know marriage from a biblical standpoint. So that's the first thing.
Yeah, that's
second thing then you were saying with regards to how you treat your spouse.
Yeah, focus on loving your spouse and respecting your spouse well. You know, even if you feel like they don't deserve it or they're not treating you well or whatever the case may be, your focus, marriage, we get it wrong so often. Nathan and I get it wrong, and we've been married for nearly 18 years. We get it wrong at times too. Sure. Marriage should not be self-seeking. It should be self-serving, you know, or it should be others serving.
Right.
We should be looking to
self-sacrificing.
Right. Yeah. That's what I meant. We should be looking to serve our spouse and sacrifice for our spouse.
Right.
And how can I think of them? How can I meet them with their desires and wants and what would fulfill them or whatever, you know? Thinking about your spouse and not yourself is really what marriage is supposed to be. And
that's right.
Start there. I think it's so counter cultural and so counter to what our hearts want to do, because when we're unhappy, we want to just, what can I do to make me happy? And we don't want to focus on somebody else. Right. But it's man, it just changes things when we choose to do things the Lord's way. It just does.
It does.
There's a book called The Love Dare, and that's really good, like jumping off point, especially particularly if you're in a place where you're like, I just really don't even like this person that I'm married to, or I'm so unfulfilled, or whatever the thing is. You know, if you're in an unhappy marriage, start out with the Love Dare, and it's going to be hard because it gives you practical ways, one a day, to love your spouse. And I think the first Love Dare is like, write them a note about the things you love about them or something like that. And you may be like, oh my gosh, I don't know. I
love when you go to sleep.
Yeah, right. I'm not sure there's anything I love. I'm sure that you can find something that you love about your spouse or appreciate about your spouse.
Yeah, if you can't, that's just, let me just be honest. If you can't, that's a you problem, right? Like if you go, oh, there isn't anything I love about my spouse, I'm calling BS on you. That's not honest. Yeah. So spend some time thinking about that.
Yeah, it may be hard. It may be hard to till that soil of, because you may have layers and layers layers of dislike piled on top of the soil of your marriage, and you may need to dig down deep to find some things that you appreciate about your spouse. But I'm sure that they're there. So I think like the first thing is something like that, and then it's every day for 40-ish days, and it really. It's a really great exercise. So I would say use that as like your kind of jumping off point, and it will help you start thinking of how to put your spouse above yourself. Yeah,
that's the super practical piece of it. I would recommend another book that I would combine with that. This book's called Praying for My Wife or Praying for My Husband. Mm-hmm. And it's 40 days again, but there's nothing to do other than to just each day you read a written out prayer that covers a different topic of what it means to be a wife or what it means to be a husband. And obviously you're, as the husband, are praying into the things for your wife and vice versa. But the purpose of both of these things, and the things that make the Love Dare and praying for your wife or husband so powerful, is that our brains, our minds, our intellect, our emotions, in some ways are a really complex thing, and in some ways are a really fickle thing. And what I mean by that is something really in the scope of life minor can completely change our emotional state on a dime. Mm. But also, and this has been well documented forever, right? There's a million books out there you could find about, quote unquote, the power of positive thinking. And some of those get a little new agey, but some of them are onto a real thing of human psychology, which is we actually govern our emotions at the intellectual level, not the other way around. So when this is the problem, is in our own minds, we create an echo chamber, right? We start feeling like our spouse is a crappy person, and then our brains want to respond to our emotion. And so your brains identify all the things your spouse does that agree with what you thought, and round you go. And so the love dare and praying for your wife or husband is reworking those circuitries, right? I mean, for one thing, prayer is just a powerful thing, and doing loving things for your spouse is a powerful thing, and it's obedience to God. But even beyond that, it starts to redefine in your mind who your spouse is, and you start to look at them differently. And as you reprogram yourself to identify different things about your spouse, you start to see the things that may or may not have always been there that you had become habitually ignoring because you were trying to reinforce this belief you already had about your spouse.
Yep. It's true. It's great.
Yeah. So,
and you may be just in a part of your marriage where you're unhappy. It may not be like the entirety of it. That may not be the narrative of your whole marriage. It may be just a season. And I would just say to you, don't accept that.
Right.
Don't accept like, oh, this is just a really bad season of our marriage, or we're just getting by. That's not great. I mean, that's good, I guess, that you're that you're still in it, but we're not supposed to be just getting by in our marriage for a season. Right. Put your marriage first and have the hard conversations and talk to your spouse about, this is a struggle right now. What do we need to do to make it not a struggle? This is how I'm feeling. And, that can be hard. That can be really hard for me too, to identify those places that aren't quite right, and to have those hard conversations. But they're so necessary for trying to get back on the same page, and for not just gritting it through a hard season, but choosing to be on the same team and working through a hard season together.
Yeah, and remember, as a Christian, the purpose of our marriage is to enter the mission field as a couple, just as you live your lives wherever you live them, as a picture of God's desired relationship that he wants to have with his wife, the church. And so when we do the Walking Dead thing in marriage, we've let our enemy castrate the mission that God called us to do.
Yeah.
And if nothing else, we should recognize when we're entering into those seasons, we're allowing the devil to win in those moments. And that should concern all of us, right? We've been invited by the Lord as married couples into this mission field of really living out the gospel message and the heart behind the gospel. Let's not let our enemy steal that ministry and mission away from us. Let's not let our enemy steal that away from our kids who are watching us, and our neighbors, and those we go to church with, and our extended family. But let's fight through these things. Let's get self-sacrificing and others-focused, and really watch our marriage. Really watch your marriage satisfy what you want in a marriage, as you stop focusing on what you're getting out of your marriage.
Yep.
And just focus on sowing into your spouse.
It's great stuff.
Awesome, guys. Thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate you tuning in for a difficult episode, tough one to talk about. If you have questions or comments about this, please put them down in the comments below. If you're on YouTube, I respond to all of our YouTube comments. Or if you're listening on podcast, love to have you pop over to our Facebook page, Marriage by Design Podcast, or check us out on our website, marriagebydesign.podbean.com, and leave a comment there as well. Guys, thanks again for joining us. Really appreciate you being here. We will be back at you next week. Until then, remember, God is for your marriage.